the backup point guard, and a damn good backup in fairness.
I think they deserve it, both of them. I mean, nobody wants to be cold, but hey, I'm gonna throw it out there. It's hard for them, so it'll be amazing just to have them because they definitely deserve it.
That is Tyasha Harris, doing something very simple that somehow became complicated around the Indiana Fever, refusing to choose between Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell. And that matters, because the real controversy is not whether both deserve recognition. It is what happens when people inside the same team start treating an MVP conversation like somebody has to lose for somebody else to win.
Let's go and pit one of them against each other. Because as I've said tons of times, all the pitting the two of them against each other does is it allows voters to get off the hook by voting Caitlin Clark all-W second team. Or, in a crazier situation, neither all-W team. All that it does is allow that to happen.
Listen closely to that argument, because this is where the stakes get bigger than one award ballot. If the conversation becomes Caitlin versus Kelsey, the risk is not merely that one player finishes a spot lower than somebody thinks she should. The risk is that voters can split their perception of Indiana's success between two stars and then use that split to downgrade both of them. That is why Harris saying both names together is more important than it sounds. It shuts down the easiest storyline. Instead of asking which Fever guard deserves to be pushed aside, it forces people to deal with the possibility that Indiana has two players producing at an MVP caliber level at the same time. And there is another part of this that becomes more uncomfortable later, because the question is not just what Harris said. The question is why that same framing apparently was not coming from everybody around the team earlier.
Who do I have higher in the MVP race? It's tough, because if Caitlin Clark played every single game, and there was no 5-minute restrictions games where she's barely playing, and her averages are probably very close to that of Kelsey Mitchell. They will be very close to that in terms of scoring.
Now the Clark side of this debate gets complicated, because availability and health are part of any season-long award discussion. The speaker's argument is hypothetical. If Clark had played every game at full capacity, without the limited stretches he references, her scoring might have landed much closer to Mitchell's. That does not mean you can simply award somebody credit for games or production that never happened. You cannot rewrite the season. But it does explain why Clark's supporters look at the raw totals and then look at the context and come away feeling like the numbers do not capture the entire story. And this is where you have to separate two different questions. Who has produced the stronger complete season? That is one debate. Who changes the Fever more dramatically when she is fully functioning? That is another. Those questions can lead voters in different directions, and pretending they are identical is how these conversations become dishonest.
And if she was averaging 23.5, if she'd been 100% healthy for the year, she's averaging 23.5 points per game and 9 assists per game. And in that scenario, like, if you look at how badly the Fever did, in games where Caitlin Clark wasn't Caitlin Clark, the Fever were terrible. Like, they were lost to the Storm. They lost to the Fire. They lost to the Liberty. In a close enough game, it's like, in games where Caitlin wasn't herself, suddenly there's 3-game flip, and she's an MVP. But she didn't play every game. And at least now, we have...
There is the actual argument being made for Clark. Not just points, not just assists, but the way Indiana looked in games where she was not herself. The source points to losses against Seattle, Phoenix, and New York as part of that case, then imagines how a healthier version of Clark might have changed the MVP picture. Whether you buy that hypothetical or not, the larger point is legitimate. Value is not always visible, only in a scoring average. A player can alter pace, shot quality, spacing, ball movement, defensive attention, and late-game decision-making without every bit of that showing up in one clean number. But there is also a trap here. If Clark's case is built entirely around what might have happened if she were healthier, while Mitchell's case is built around what she actually did across the season, then the comparison becomes unfair in the opposite direction. You cannot punish Mitchell for being available and productive. That is exactly why the Fever should not need to choose. The strongest organizational position is not to pretend the two resumes are identical. It is to say they are valuable in different ways, both belong in the upper tier of the conversation, and voters can sort out the order.
Of Ty Harris, who is a player on the Indiana Fever that is like, hell yeah, give both of them MVP. Because up to this point, we have Aaliyah Boston push back on Caitlin Clark not even being in the MVP race. Not even push back on that.
And that is the pivot. Harris publicly embraces the idea of both players being promoted, while the speaker contrasts that with Aaliyah Boston not pushing back strongly enough, in his view, when Clark was left out of an MVP discussion. Notice what is actually being criticized there. It is not Boston supporting Mitchell. Supporting Mitchell makes perfect sense. She has been producing at an elite level. The criticism is that praising one teammate can sound like dismissing another teammate when the question is framed as either or. That distinction matters, because fans are already primed to turn everything into camps. One quote becomes proof that somebody prefers Kelsey. Another quote becomes proof that somebody is defending Caitlin. Then teammates get dragged into a rivalry they may not even believe exists. Harris avoided that completely. She did not walk into the trap. She essentially said, why choose?
Like, they've got to push both of them. Because you don't want to put one against the other. You don't. You don't. Let's see what the responses are. Good teammate. What everyone in the team should be saying, good job, Ty. Yes. Aaliyah Boston could have said the same thing. Aaliyah Boston should have said the same thing. Not could have, should have. This is the thing. Like, Kelsey Mitchell is playing too well that her teammates should not be talking about her like she's not an MVP.
That is probably the cleanest version of the argument. If you are inside the locker room, there is almost no upside to ranking teammates publicly when both are performing at this level. And this is where the public reaction becomes part of the story. Fans do not hear those answers as neutral basketball analysis. They hear loyalty. They hear endorsement. They hear who somebody believes matters more. That might be unfair, but it is predictable. So when one Fever player says Mitchell deserves MVP consideration, some Clark fans hear an insult that was never spoken. When somebody defends Clark's value, some Mitchell supporters hear disrespect toward the player who has been consistently producing. The original basketball discussion gets swallowed by identity politics inside a fan base. That is why Harris's wording is smart. She gives nobody an easy weapon. She acknowledges Mitchell. She acknowledges Clark. She does not pretend one player's greatness requires the other player's resume to shrink. And if Indiana wants to avoid another social media cycle where every teammate answer becomes evidence in some internal civil war, that is probably the template.
Kelsey Mitchell's been better this year than last year, and they were pushing her for MVP last year. Caitlin Clark has been too good that you can't not push her as MVP. But it's one of those things now where you've even seen Ty Harris, it was her Instagram post where it's like her reaction on the bench and her caption is CC or Kelsey just did something ridiculous. And it's like, yeah. Like, that's the thing where it's like, when you have two MVP races, or two players in MVP race, when clearly, like, look, one of them is, in my opinion, probably like one spot higher.
Now we get to the part people tend to skip when they are arguing online. Kelsey Mitchell has earned this conversation through performance, not charity. The speaker's point is that Mitchell has been too good for teammates to talk about her like she is merely having a nice season. At the same time, Clark has been too impactful to be casually excluded from the same tier. That is the tension Indiana is dealing with, and it is a good problem. Most teams would love to have one player forcing herself into serious MVP discussion. Indiana has a debate over whether two belong somewhere in that upper group. The mistake would be treating that abundance as a crisis. You can rank them. You can argue Mitchell has the better season. You can argue Clark has the greater all-around influence. You can say one belongs second and the other fourth. Those are normal basketball disagreements. What becomes unnecessary is turning that ranking into a loyalty test. Because if your argument for Mitchell requires minimizing Clark, it is weak. And if your argument for Clark requires pretending Mitchell's season is secondary, that is weak too. Strong cases do not need sabotage.
You're in the other or two spots higher. They're both probably somewhere between 2 and 4. They're in the chasing pack. And again, they make it seem like the chasing pack is trying to fight, is like the field when Usain Bolt ran the 2008 Olympics. But actually, the chasing pack, it should be the field of like Keely Hodgkinson, Femke Bol, and oh my god, I blanked on the Swiss woman's name. She's the fucking best of them all. Oh my God. In the women's 800 where it's like they're finishing, they're right neck and neck. They are neck and neck.
The source compares them to athletes running almost neck and neck in a chasing pack. And that image is useful because it captures what Indiana should want voters to see. Not two teammates blocking each other. Two teammates forcing themselves into the same elite group. This is also where award discourse becomes distorted by the favorite. Once one player is perceived as the clear MVP frontrunner, everybody else gets discussed almost like they are competing for relevance rather than the trophy. Second, third, and fourth can start feeling interchangeable. But they are not interchangeable to the players, to the franchise, or to how the season gets remembered. All WNBA placement matters. MVP vote totals matter. Finishing second versus fifth changes the way a season is described years later. And when two teammates are close enough that the electorate could divide around them, organizational messaging can at least make sure both resumes stay visible. That does not mean a team can manufacture an award winner through social media. It means a team should not accidentally weaken its own players by feeding a false choice. And now we are getting closer to the real payoff, because there is one specific Mitchell accomplishment cited here that makes the idea of ignoring her impossible.
You have two MVP candidates. It is close. They have been both playing. Like Kelsey Mitchell is going to be second. She's going to have the best scoring season of all time, not by A'ja Wilson. She's going to be the second person to ever score 1,000 points in a season. So, look, I'm going to be real here. If you are the Indiana Fever, what you don't want to do is, as we have said plenty of times, pit them against each other. That's what you don't want to do.
There it is. The speaker projects Mitchell to become only the second player ever to score 1,000 points in a season and describes her campaign as historically significant. That is the kind of production that changes the tone of the debate. You are not talking about a player getting MVP publicity because she shares a backcourt with Caitlin Clark. You are talking about a player building a statistical case substantial enough to demand her own spotlight. And this is where some Clark fans need to be careful. Mitchell being celebrated does not reduce Clark's importance. It actually strengthens Indiana's story. If the Fever have one player creating historic scoring production and another player generating elite scoring plus playmaking impact, the conclusion should not be that one of them must be overrated. The conclusion might simply be that Indiana's backcourt is unusually loaded. The same applies in reverse. Mitchell supporters do not need Clark removed from the conversation to validate what Mitchell is doing. If anything, doing it next to another high-usage star makes the balance more interesting. There are only so many possessions, only so many shots, only so many chances to dominate the ball. Sharing that environment while still producing elite individual value is not automatically a negative. So the more logical question becomes this: why has the conversation been structured like a duel instead of a partnership?
You don't want that to be a thing. You do not want to go and have like a situation where, as we have seen before, like a whole social media shit show because Aaliyah Boston decided that Kelsey Mitchell was the MVP. So I'm just like, it's good to see the way it needs to be said. And again, I have no issue with trying to push Kelsey Mitchell for MVP. The Fever should be doing it.
That reference to the social media fallout around Aaliyah Boston gets directly to the problem. One teammate gives Mitchell the MVP label, and suddenly, the basketball point is almost secondary to the reaction surrounding who was not named. That is not really about Boston. It is about the environment around this team. Caitlin Clark brings an enormous audience. Kelsey Mitchell has her own supporters. Aaliyah Boston has her own relationship with fans. Every sentence gets clipped, reposted, interpreted, and assigned a side. And in that environment, a perfectly reasonable compliment can become evidence in a feud. Which means Indiana has to understand that messaging is part of the competitive ecosystem now. That does not mean scripting player answers. It means recognizing what the audience is going to do with them. If a teammate wants to say Mitchell has been the MVP, she is allowed to believe that. If somebody thinks Clark is more valuable, that is also a defensible basketball opinion. But from the organization's perspective, promoting both avoids creating a needless hierarchy before the voters even make theirs. And that is the part I think matters more than whether anybody literally believes a co-MVP result is coming.
As they should be pushing Caitlin Clark for MVP. Because when you have a rare occasion, when you have two MVP candidates, and there are people saying that how are they MVP candidates if they're both on the one team and that team is not major favorites to win it all? The answer is blame Kelly Krauskopf and Amber Cox. The team doesn't really have a backup center, and their main center came into the season badly hurt. Like, not just slightly hurt, pretty badly hurt. So yeah, it is a...
Now the source shifts to a completely different issue: roster construction. He argues that if people want to know how two MVP-level candidates can be on the same team without that team automatically being viewed as overwhelming championship favorites, blame should not fall on the stars. He points instead toward roster depth, specifically the backup center situation, while naming Kelly Krauskopf and Amber Cox in that criticism. That is an opinion, but it introduces an important distinction. Individual awards measure individual seasons. Championship odds measure the entire roster, coaching, health, matchup profile, depth, and postseason environment. Those are not the same calculation. A team can have two tremendous perimeter players and still have structural weaknesses elsewhere. A player can be one of the most valuable individuals in the league without her team being unbeatable. The logic that says, if Indiana has two MVP candidates, then Indiana must automatically be the championship favorite, sounds clean until you actually examine how basketball teams function. 5 players are on the floor. Rotations matter. Frontcourt depth matters. Health matters. Bench minutes matter. Defensive matchups matter. One superstar cannot erase every roster problem, and 2 stars do not automatically erase them either. This is where the Caitlin versus Kelsey framing becomes even stranger. If the Fever fall short of the highest team expectation, people may use that as evidence that neither candidate was really that valuable. But if weaknesses exist outside those 2 players, then you are blaming the strongest parts of the roster for not covering every weakness in the roster. That is backwards.
It is an interesting one, but look, I gotta say it, like, this is the way it should be done, and shout out Ty Harris. Like, Ty Harris is gonna leave as, you say you don't want no co-MVP, they're not winning, neither of them are winning MVP. Neither of them are winning MVP. Let's be very clear here. Neither of these players are winning MVP. The MVP was decided in May. That is the way it is. That is the way it is. And there's not going to be a co-MVP. Do you know how hard it is going to be for the voting to be co-MVP? You need to get the exact same amount of points and the exact same amount of first place votes.
And finally, the source says out loud what makes the co-MVP slogan more symbolic than literal. He does not believe either Fever player is actually going to win the award, and he argues that producing a true tie in the voting would be extraordinarily unlikely. This is the payoff. The point of pushing both is not that Indiana should seriously expect voters to create some perfectly balanced co-MVP ending. It is that the team has 2 players worthy of being treated like major candidates, and there is no strategic benefit in forcing the organization to choose one publicly. That is a very different claim. A campaign can matter even if the player does not win. It can influence where she finishes. It can influence all WNBA perception. It can define how media evaluate the season. It can make sure historic production does not get buried beneath a bigger national storyline. For Mitchell, that visibility matters because Clark naturally dominates attention surrounding Indiana. For Clark, it matters because missed time or compromised stretches can make people dismiss her season without accounting for the level she reaches when healthy. So each player actually has a different reason to need the campaign. Mitchell needs people to see beyond the gravitational pull of Clark's celebrity and appreciate her own production. Clark needs people to see beyond availability questions and appreciate how radically she can change Indiana's ceiling. Those arguments are not mutually exclusive.
It is impossible. It is impossible, but from the team perspective, they should be trying to promote the 2 of them. Don't wear have t-shirts with both of them on it when they had MVP t-shirts last year. It is a rare occasion where the 2 of the top 4 MVP candidates are on the one team. That is such a rare occasion, and the team should be pushing that, and it's good to see Ty.
That is why the t-shirt example is more revealing than it sounds. If Indiana wants to market this properly, put both names in the campaign, present it as the rare reality it is. 2 players from the same team occupying the same high-level award conversation for different reasons, and Tyasha Harris gave them the cleanest version of that message. No ranking, no unnecessary comparison, no quote that can easily be weaponized into, she supports this teammate over that teammate. Just an acknowledgement that both have done enough to deserve recognition. The deeper lesson here is that the Fever do not actually have an MVP problem. They have a framing problem. The basketball world is conditioned to turn award races into elimination games. One player rises, another must fall. One resume gets stronger, another supposedly gets exposed. That structure works when you are debating candidates from different teams. Inside one locker room, it can become destructive nonsense, because Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell are not campaigning against each other every night. They are trying to win the same games. Mitchell scoring at a historic pace helps Clark. Clark creating advantages as a scorer and passer helps Mitchell. Defenses worrying about one can create space for the other. Their success overlaps far more than it conflicts. And that is why the smartest Fever campaign is not complicated. Make voters evaluate each player on her own resume while making it impossible to pretend Indiana's success belongs exclusively to one of them. There is still room for honest disagreement. You might believe Mitchell has clearly had the stronger season because of the scoring, consistency, and availability described here. You might believe Clark's combination of scoring and playmaking makes her the more valuable player when she is fully herself. You might have them second and third. You might have them third and fourth. None of that requires turning one into the villain of the other's campaign. That is where the conversation went wrong before. Fans treated praise like subtraction. A compliment to Mitchell became an implied slight at Clark. A defense of Clark became an implied attack on Mitchell. And once that happens, teammates cannot answer anything without somebody trying to decode hidden meaning. Harris solved that problem in one response. It sounds almost too obvious, but obvious is sometimes what a chaotic conversation needs. And there is one last piece of this that matters going forward. If Indiana continues pushing both candidates, watch how the media react. Do they seriously evaluate two separate cases, or do they immediately demand that the Fever choose which star is more valuable? Because that reaction will tell you whether this was ever really about award criteria or whether people simply prefer conflict. The Fever do not need to manufacture Caitlin versus Kelsey. They already have the better story. Two elite teammates producing different kinds of value at the same time, while everybody outside the locker room keeps trying to turn them into opponents. So force yourself to choose on the actual basketball question. If you had one MVP ballot and had to rank the two Fever stars today, are you putting Kelsey Mitchell ahead because of the season-long scoring and availability, or Caitlin Clark ahead because of the broader offensive impact when she is at full strength? Pick one, explain why in the comments, and if you want more breakdowns that separate the basketball from the manufactured drama, like the video and subscribe.